Good morning, everyone, and thanks to those of you who are joining us on Zoom. We will get started in just a minute or two. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2024-25 Frank Untermyer Lecture Award and Ceremony. My name is Gina Bucola, and I'm the Dean of the College of Humanities, Education, and Social Sciences here at Roosevelt University. Thanks to all of us who are joining us here in the room and via Zoom as we gather together to celebrate faculty members of Roosevelt's past and present, Frank Untermyer and Dr. Sullivan Meyers. Today, we're excited to once again welcome Amy Lykover, the daughter of Frank and Ethel Untermyer, to our campus. Amy established this award in 2006 as a meaningful way to keep her father's spirit alive. Frank Untermyer was a founding faculty member at Roosevelt University and professor emeritus of political science and what was then called African Studies. The award recognizes an excellent teacher whose academic focus lies in social sciences. And I now would like to invite Amy to share a few words with us.
Thank you, Gina. Hello, everyone. My husband Joe and I flew in from California. This is one of the events that we attend. The other one is in honor of my mother, who is a Roosevelt grad. I'm really happy to be here, especially in this beautiful room overlooking Lake Michigan. And as always, understand the value of an education in downtown Chicago. I walked amidst the students and I have that same sort of excitement of learning. I'm a teacher as well. Gina described my father. I want to just mention that he was a very humble man. This was a man who didn't want anyone to celebrate his birthday. He didn't even want to be honored in any way. And yet, I, as a teacher, understand how extraordinary it is to be an excellent teacher. I know how hard it is. And the fact that he sat with student after student, tutoring them, teaching them about the links between world literature and whatever field they were studying, and served as their advocate throughout his, I want to say, 40-plus years here, speaks of his devotion to learning and to education. And with that, I'm extremely happy that this year's awardee is Sullivan Room, who is going to talk about the challenge to make a difference. Now, my daughter once said, "Mom, we can't all be leaders." And I thought about that, and she's right. But we can make a difference, each and every one of us. And Sullivan will speak of those of us who are teachers and those of us who are students, and of course, so many of us who work in institutions to make a difference for future generations. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to whoever is next. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. We're very grateful for your ongoing support to Roosevelt and to this award, and we're honored, as always, to have you and your family members with us today. We're especially honored to have you here to provide this context for the legacy of your father and this award. It is now my honor to introduce the 2024-25 recipient of the Frank Untermyer Excellence in Teaching Award, Dr. Sullivan Meyers, Chair and Professor of Psychology. In their letter announcing the selection of Dr. Meyers for the Untermyer Award, the committee members, who are past recipients of this award themselves, observed that, consistent with the values of Frank Untermyer, the committee was impressed by Dr. Meyers' pedagogy that creates an atmosphere of valuing and respecting diverse perspectives, elevating a plurality of voices, and promoting values inherent in democracy. As noted in one of the nominations of Professor Meyers, the service options in his courses have yielded more than 28,000 hours of student-site partnerships throughout the Chicago area and beyond. These experiences become more meaningful because they are accompanied with an extensive self-reflective process. The selection committee also notes that Professor Meyers' project assignments link learning outcomes to the university's mission. And this is a quote also from the selection committee. People who advocate for social justice believe all members of society should have equal rights and access to opportunities. The pursuit of social justice is a hallmark of Roosevelt University and is an important element in promoting children's well-being. This captures both the spirit of Dr. Meyers' mentorship and means of instruction, as well as the spirit of the Untermyer Award itself. Professor Meyers holds the AB in psychology from Brown University and a PhD in clinical psychology from Michigan State University. As a clinical psychologist, Dr. Meyers focuses on children's well-being and family relationships, particularly among those who face adversity because of challenges within their communities. We now turn to today's lecture, The Challenge to Make a Difference. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Meyers.
I'm so grateful to be here and have this as an acknowledgement, but also just the opportunity to talk to everybody. It's a very basic premise that we're talking about. What are we doing? I think a lot of times we might have known what we were doing before the pandemic. I think it was an unmooring experience for many of us, especially if you were in a direct service industry where the people who you were helping weren't really there even though they were there. And oftentimes, I think it's striking when you're up against something that is so much bigger than yourself. It really starts to beg the question, what am I doing? For many of us, I don't think it's all better. I think if we think about how universities have changed since the pandemic, how our students have changed, it's still pretty profound. The other thing that many of us of a certain age are now realizing is that society is so much more volatile. We get these social events that just wash over all of us. And sometimes we're able to fight against the tide, and other times perhaps not so much. So as we wrestle with things that are larger than us, sometimes what we're trying to figure is how do we change the things that are more proximal to us to make a difference? So this is what I'm going to be talking about. A very basic question, do we matter? I think as faculty members, we think or we hope we matter because we're here to impart knowledge and skills. But it gets more complicated than that, because maybe the people we're talking to don't value our knowledge or skills. Public sentiment towards higher education has changed so much. We've clearly moved from this idea of a fundamental good for the well-being and maintenance of society to an individual commodity. I have an education, but it's going to situate myself more competitively in the job market. However, in the past couple of years, even that has come under fire. Many families are questioning the value of a college education, and is there a return on investment? Will I be able to unsaddle the debt that me and my family are incurring? Or, frighteningly so, even after I graduate, will I find a job? Or will I essentially have a job that pays more or less what would have been the case if I had not gone to college? So professors find themselves in a very challenging situation where we really have to think, what is our value add above and beyond what any student could have received from reading books, taking an online asynchronous class, ChatGPTing it in, or any one of the wonderfully democratized sources of information. And then what are our roles in this? So here's a slight shift from previous addresses. We were remote for such a while. Rather than lecture and take questions, I'd much rather have a conversation along the way. And here's a very clever way of doing it. So if you take out your cell phone and open up a browser in it, you just type in this URL, menti.com, menti.com, and we can really have fun. Even if you're watching this streaming, you can do this on your laptop or on your cell phone. So you go to menti.com, and then you type in a code, which is 1318-1318-6297. So menti.com, and then 1318-6297. And here's the question just to answer. When or how do professors make a difference? Now, if you're a student who's watching this or attending, you can think, what were the things that my professors did that made a difference? We have the opportunity to make a difference, but do we really? So take a couple minutes. It looks like people around here are experiencing success as I see fingers move across. And then I'll show you some of the responses, and then we can talk. What I'll also do is play with my slides for a sec and bring up a browser, and I can show you what you're all writing. And I'll read them too. So what some of the people are writing is valuing students, connecting, noticing things beyond the status quo, and caring enough to ask. So it's not only seeing something, but saying something, to quote the CTA. It's listening closely. It's shaping valuable discussions, which is not the same as just ordinary discussions. It's things that reflect students' priorities. Being authentic, treated as an equal, a partner in society, sharing skills and attitudes that improve society, encouragement, bringing students together, forming community, having new ideas, sharing understandings, warmth, one-on-one, being deliberate, affirming, figuring out what's working and what's not in problem solving, getting to know each other, exposure to new ideas, accessing technical information. There's so much there. I asked my students the same thing this past week. They're on the same page as you all. Caring, connections, inclusivity, skills, support, encouraging, being seen, presenting information that's clear and fun. I like that idea. College is a joyous experience. Asking students about their understanding. What we'll talk about today is essentially a pipeline of making a difference. It's starting with this idea that care provides a foundation. Without care, it seems so detached, so sterile. It has to then pivot into people reflecting on what they're doing, which is really a unique value proposition of higher education. We should be intentional about informing and allowing this critical analysis and connecting. And the last part is facilitating action. Now, beginning with this idea of care, it's trickier, I'll tell you. Take a look at this. Does this make sense? Have you heard it? How to be healthy. 3 steps. You eat well, you exercise, and you manage your stress, right? Yeah, but Then you end up with a list like this. And it got longer, and it got complicated, and we start failing because we have to eat veggies and fruits and don't have the highly processed foods and monitoring the portion sizes and having 150 minutes of aerobic activity and strength trained and sleep and nourishing relationships and checkups and, of course, staying hydrated, thus supporting the whole movement of people walking around with very large containers of water to continually be sufficiently hydrated. It's the same thing for caring. I think we know how to care. It's very intuitive, and I really don't think you want to enter into higher education or any service field if you're misanthropic or antisocial. Maybe at a research institution where you can lead a monastic life, but if you're at a teaching institution like Roosevelt, being caring and connecting is obviously very critical to what we do. But you know what happens? It's the execution. So I'm going to talk a minute about this, and then we'll open it up again for people's thoughts. When psychologists and communication scientists talk about warmth, they use a term called immediacy, which is being there immediately with the other person. And it has different parts. There's the verbal parts and the physical parts. The verbal parts are expressing interest, asking. It's your tone of voice. Your physical parts are what you do with your body. Are you open? Where is your body? My body could be in different places right now. It's very easy for my body to be here, but I've created a barrier. I'm 5'6" or 7 if I stand up straight. If I got taller platform shoes, I might be able to push 5'7.5". I'm eaten up by the podium. I realize what it's like to be my height in the world. It's very easy to be distant. So are we out? Are we connecting? Who are we looking at? Are we inviting? Are we open? Or are we putting up barriers, which can happen all the time for a variety of reasons? So are we connecting using our voices, our bodies? Do we feel like we've created a working alliance, a connection with our students? This is a very important concept within psychotherapy. It's the idea of forming a working alliance with your patient or client so we can do the hard work together. We care about each other. It's essentially the foundation upon which we can build. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what you want is you want to be a role model. You want your students to say, I value who you are and what you teach. And ultimately, when you have a role model, that person travels with you. The term from psychology, which I get such a kick out of because I can make it so visual in my own mind, is called the introject, meaning you take the other person and then, boop, you get this little internal representation of that person in your brain. And if they're a nice introject, they say lovely things to you. Like, you got this. You can do it. I believe in you. You're worthwhile. You're competent. You'll be okay. Remember what we talked about? Those things stay with people long after the relationship is over. They're like a lovely Greek chorus. Now, it is true that introjects, or the voices in our head, can be the critical people who we've known. Teachers who could be dismissive. Yes. Not quite. Let's move on to the next. Those sort of critical voices that happen very quickly. I'm disappointed in you. I see you as a person of so much promise, and this paper really missed the mark. Well, there'll be an opportunity to try again. Things that people have heard at some point from K to even graduate school. It's this opportunity for us to be the kind introject. The person who Frank Untermyer was. It's this idea of caring and investment. And the idea of carrying forward. So if I'm not mistaken, he died about 20 years ago to the, yeah. The opportunity for any of us to have a presence that carries forward across decades is an amazingly powerful thing. Do we leave that on the table? Or do we bring it forth to say that's something that we should do because we matter? So what do you do that exhibits care? Think about it in your own professional life, and we'll open it up because there's enough people here where we can actually welcome contributions as opposed to being a very large room where it would be harder. What do you do in your own classroom or your own life that communicates that you care about somebody? Immediate connection is people come through the door. Yeah, which is a core idea of hospitality. You're welcome. You have a place here at the table. What else do people do? What do you do with your students? What makes you feel welcome?
Care about their achievement. Obviously we're all following what students are doing in class and how well they're doing and all of that, and work with them individually to help them, because everyone can use help, even A students, right? You're helping them in whatever way they need to grow, and then follow up.
Yeah, it's being invested in their well-being and their success. It's giving of yourself in a way that's generous, and the generosity is recognized. What else?
As simple as learning their names and how to pronounce them correctly.
Yeah. It's the idea of learning names. Names are powerful. If you don't know it, especially within the first week or two of class, maybe you then become embarrassed, you never learn it, and you're not able to recognize that person, and they are always a little bit out of step. Marjorie?
You pay close attention so that if something changes, you can check in with them and say, I notice X, you okay?
Yeah.
So you convey that you're noticing them, and that you can detect a concern.
Yeah, it's knowing your students well enough to see when something is off and being a good diagnostician and then loop it back. When we lack information, you know what happens? We just kind of fill in the blanks. So this morning, I received an email from one of my students who was hit by a car. She's okay, but she was saying the reason why she didn't submit the assignment was she was dealing with the physical and psychological after effects of being hit by a car. What would have happened if she didn't let me know? Like, I would not have really thought that would be a top 3 contender. We know sickness happens, we know accidents happen, but I would think that maybe she's too busy, maybe she doesn't care. I don't know, I could fill it in the blank with whatever. But this idea of checking up, but having the relationship where they're willing to share that is really fundamental.
There's also something that may sound very dated, the concept of these different kinds of intelligences, and yet I think if we recognize that each student really does bring something to the table, even if they're having a hard time with writing and whatever computer work people are doing, the student who participates a lot, or the student who just has some skill that is very special, if you can recognize how each one of these add to the mix of the classroom and balance it out.
Yeah, it's taking the time to understand that each person has a unique profile of traits. And it's interesting too. In my intro psych classes, I often have a very simple exercise. List your 3 most lovely traits. And if you can't identify them, imagine what your best friend or your most supportive family member will say. And then I flip it. Write your 3 worst traits. The things that you would really like to change, or at least somebody else would like to change in you. And then I ask the question, who are you? And the answer is obviously, you're both. We're our best and our worst traits. It's what people are. We're a mixed bag. But whether those are recognized, I find very profound. Are we only defined by our liabilities? Or do people acknowledge strengths? So to your point, and to connect with Marjorie's, is your eye so keen that you can recognize what these are? It becomes a very important part of being an optimist. I'm not an optimist by nature. At best, I'm a pragmatist. At worst, I could be a cynic. I think most therapists have seen so much that's so wrong in the world, it's very hard to be Pollyannish at the end of that experience. But I need to remind myself to be an optimist by thinking like we're talking. Be intentional, have a keen eye, recognize the best in everybody, because we have our best traits and our worst traits, but I'd prefer to play always on terra firma. Now, the challenge with this in mind is there are barriers. These are wonderful intentions, but what gets in the way? Return to Menti, menti.com, type in the code again, same one as before, 1318 6297. If it's bumped you out, if it's still open, you just get to type. What gets in the way of this? We talked about what the this is. But a funny thing happens on the way to the forum. Things go wrong. It's good to be able to acknowledge that. Again, this is me who's pragmatist me as opposed to idealist me. Students don't share. Professors feel disengaged. There's the chasm between me and others. Do my students share my background? Some, clearly not all. Can it be traversed? Disengagement, again, that checking out, unable to receive care. Too many students not knowing what's around and figuring things out. There's so much we don't know. They resist our efforts. We put ourselves out there, and it is unrequited care. Being practical, there's so much to do. We fill in the blanks with assumptions because we don't have the data. Maybe they're accurate, maybe they're not. We're tired. We're very tired. When I ask my colleagues, I hear things that are very common. I have so much to teach. There's so much to know. We have course objectives. How am I going to run my class in terms of time if I'm checking in? I have a large course load. All of these people, there's so many students. They're not on the same page. It's not if I understand one, I understand all. Transactionalism, I find this one a little sneaky and a little tricky. Hey, look, I show up, I take my PowerPoints from the textbook publisher, I'm here, you show up, you do the test bank questions from the textbook publisher, nobody look at Quizlet or ChatGPT, you get your grade, I get my paycheck. If I can think of it, I'm sure somebody is doing this.
Well, it's
and
not
if,
so crass always.
no, it's true. We could say that we could do benign transactionalism and say that I'm here to elevate and you're here to receive.
And appreciate my elevation.
That could be true too. But sometimes it's easy when people are just depleted that they fall back to the lowest common denominator. It's really hard for many instructors now when they put multiple choice questions online. I mean, many of us, even if it's ones that we've designed ourselves, you still can find within a year all the answers on Quizlet. Any written prompt, you can just mess around and just chat GPT what you want your students to do and see what it actually generates, and then realize this is the beginning. In 2-3 years, think about what artificial intelligence is going to be able to do. Maybe it's this idea that we still participate in the process without necessarily being able to reconcile the substance. The idea of burden and overwhelm. A lot of people are just so tired, it's hard to form relationships or connect when they feel like they have little left to give, or the idea of the unrequited. If I put myself out there and I care for you and you disregard me, I feel like a chump. I feel like it's a personal slight, as opposed to if I played it safe, stayed behind the podium, nobody knows me, I know nobody, I show up and look pretty and do what's expected of me, and at the end of the day, I've discharged my responsibilities, it's a safer move. If I show my humanity to other people, and it's rejected or dismissed or devalued, what does that mean? I've put myself in a position where, especially if I'm feeling like there's not as much of me to share, that it's been disregarded. So there's so many things that create barriers. So it's, again, easy to say, like eating healthy, but harder to do. It's not just about care, because, again, it's more than a therapeutic experience that we're aiming for. We've got to make things salient and things that give the opportunity for connection and reflection to students' lives. I have no appreciation for music. None. It's really sad. I can have it in the background. I have no appreciation of sports. None. And it's been embarrassing throughout my entire life. Most people who I know will connect somehow to sports or music. You can talk to me all day about it, but it's casting pearls before swine. It's this idea that I will not be able to benefit at all. No one has ever asked me to think about it. In reality, the reasons why is nobody in my family was ever invested in sports or music. I don't have any memories of going to a ball game with my father or family. I don't have memories of going to a concert. I saw Billy Joel once. It was a good concert. But other than that, I have no memories of having friends go to a concert for music. I've been to different places. I've been to the symphony and to the opera, but I have nothing to hang it on. That's true for some of our students' entire higher education. It's something that's speaking a different language. Do we know what our students value? Do we know what they're bringing to the table? Now, the idea that's the technical term from education is called constructivism. We use it in psychology as well. It's this idea that we have knowledge frameworks that are existing from the get-go. And they not only reflect cognitive knowledge, but learned knowledge that's more emotional in nature. It's how everybody makes sense of the world. We're walking around with a blueprint. And then we learn new information, and it gets hung like Christmas ornaments on a tree trunk. Sometimes we learn things that can't be hung so neatly on a branch, so we start building new branches to make it more integrative. Do you know what your students know? Do you know what they approached the table with originally? I supervise graduate or doctoral students when they're first learning how to teach. And a very basic question is, how do you know what level to pitch at? They're devoting their life to studying a field. They speak in technical terms. They speak in jargon, much more so than even I do. And their students in their classes feel like it's being pitched way above their head. It's this idea of knowing where to start, knowing what's important, knowing what people know, and then providing content that's consistent with it. Thinking what our students really want out of the entire educational experience and not assuming we know best. And to the extent where every student is coming from a different background, spending that time to connect. But again, it's hard. It's redesigning what we're doing. Life is not a multiple choice test, but multiple choice tests are sure easier to grade. Is it that we're allowing our students to do things that truly matter to us within a field? Or have we provided a synthetic experience because it's just how we do business in higher education? Write a term paper, research a paper, have 6 original sources. Cite according to a conventional system that truly makes no sense to outsiders. And be sure to use Times New Roman with 12-point font and 1-inch margin. 1-inch margins, yes, that is here. That is everywhere. Do memos have to be in Times New Roman font? In business, do they care about memos? Do they care about any of this? If you're helping clients in therapy, if you're a teacher in a classroom, if you're doing investigative journalism, if you're writing a lovely poem or sonnet, who's sitting there looking at the font? Why are we looking at fonts? We look at fonts a lot because we're really focusing on the things that we can control and the things that we can standardize, but maybe those aren't the things that are important, and our students know it. So it's saying we live in a wonderful palace in our fields. Come explore the different rooms with us. Why are we doing this for a living? There is a reason. Do we share that reason with people? Maybe, maybe not. Do something. Anybody know who said that a couple weeks ago? Yeah. Do we ask people to do things? I think this is one of the biggest problems at Roosevelt, by the way, because we're held to a higher standard. If we were an institution that had subordinated social justice goals, maybe it wouldn't be so important to do anything, because we didn't take it upon ourselves to make the world a better place. But what happens when you take it upon yourself to make the world a better place, but you don't facilitate opportunities to do so? You're a hypocrite. I find that very, very hard to swallow. And many people share that belief, but it's hard to facilitate action. Let me give some ideas and we'll open it up again on the Mentimeter. I struggle a lot with reading the news now. I check the polls. I check betting markets. I read the pundits, the betting markets on the election. Yeah, not the betting markets because I got a horse. And I'm trying to make sense of it, and the best I can do is give money to my candidate, who incidentally always wants money and has a very personal relationship with me, and texts me, and emails me several times a day. And I hit unsubscribe from a lot of them too, but they keep on coming. And I feel like I can do nothing. Personal agency. It's a very tricky idea to know that it's incumbent on you to make the world a better place, but you feel like you cannot make the world a better place. I'll tell you how I've sort of squared my circle, and I'm curious about how you've done it. I've squared my circle by devoting 28 plus years here, and at Michigan State I would have very large classes, and I would have 300 people doing service learning, and they just had to go out into the community to somehow connect what it is that we talk about to make somebody's life better. I find it pretty straightforward being a child clinical psychologist, that there are always kids in need. You can help in schools, you can help in social service agencies. When I've focused on adults, there are so many social service agencies for them. I've come up with action projects, which one will be launching this week in one of my undergrad classes, which is find your state and local, not federal, your state and local elected officials, and reach out to them. The reason why is you might be able to talk to them. I don't know how many people have a direct line to Dick Durbin, but I've seen my state rep, my state rep used to have an all-state office down the block. They live in district. I bumped into them in supermarkets. They're much more accessible, as are their staff, to talk about something that matters. I'm curious for you, if you want to pivot what you know and what you care about into an action project, what have you done? So again, we're going to go back to Mentimeter. What are some examples of how students in your field can put knowledge into practice? What do you do if you want to have people make a difference? Bless you. All right, so scrolling to what you're all responding on this one, to allow students to help each other through mentorship. That makes a difference. Lead by example. If you do something in your own field, can you have students participate in some way? I mean, think about what natural scientists do who have labs. Can students participate in lab work? Sure. Is the lab work routine, or is it the higher end stuff? Could be higher end stuff. Volunteering. It could be stitched into classes. There's so many opportunities. We live in a very big city that has lots of need. Connecting the community via art. This is what I love too. It's the creativity and the versatility that goes into this. It's not the province of any one of our fields where we're somehow locked out of the opportunity to translate knowledge into practice. Students can develop their own case studies to develop skills. This is called authentic assessment. It's something that they truly can showcase. And it's also probably better for jobs, because you can say, hey, look, this is what I can do that I've done. And if it does have validity or currency, employers are concerned about it because it does connect to things that are happening outside the four walls of the university. Pro bono aid, lobbying, creating change within a profession, doing zines that can be given to communities. So again, this is the idea of what can we do in a form that's not a research paper, but something that actually exists apart from universities, that has currency and impact. But it requires a bit of ingenuity at times to think about how it would play out. They can report and publish. They can show up for events. They can tell stories and be the conduit to represent others. Community projects, internships, mentors, write a proposal for change on an issue, identify partners, interviews. All of this says that we can do more. Now, I have to go to the end on this one because it keeps on going back to the beginning. But maybe going back to the beginning is where the ending is anyway. We need to take it upon ourselves to make a difference. It doesn't happen automatically. We need to think about the foundational issues. Why are we doing this? It's so easy to be caught in the day-to-day that we forget the big picture. Let me tell you more that I know about Frank. After he retired from the university, Jonathan Green, who again, you have to be of a certain age at the university, described some of the things that he would do. In the decade after he retired, he would show up on a regular basis to meet with students individually. For 10 years. No pay, no expectation. It's because he cared. Many people know but don't know he would give out of pocket to students to help them who had need. He would advocate for people who were disenfranchised. I don't think that was his job, or maybe it was his job. It's this idea that there has to be a higher calling to us. Students know authenticity. We need meaning. Want to hear a horrible story? This past year, I had a health scare. When I went in for high cholesterol, they were doing more tests, and basically my cardiologist said rather glibly that he suspected I had a silent heart attack. So what did I do? I Googled silent heart attack. And what did the Google say to me? Most people who have had a silent heart attack have 10 years to live. You have a 50-50 chance because a silent heart attack will destroy cardiac muscle just as much as a heart attack that you know happened because of pain. My doctor was asking, did you have something that hurt a lot? And my response was, maybe acid reflux? He goes, maybe. And then the conversation stops there. The follow-up testing indicated there was no silent heart attack. It's an abnormal EKG. Probably. I think that's life. sometimes there are moments where we really do have to return to this fundamental. What are we doing? What's most important in our personal life, in our work life? And a very germane question, how do I want to be remembered? It's very easy to lose track of that. There's a saying in Judaism, after somebody dies, may his memory be for a blessing, or may his memory be a blessing. This is the key thing. And it's not just a regular blessing, it's a blessing that inspires action. This is a very crucial concept within Judaism. It's not a creedal religion, it's a religion where your hands matter a lot. Thinking about Frank, wrestling with what I'm talking about today, really makes his memory for a blessing. It carries forward from somebody who was foundational in this university's founding, taking the core ideals and realizing that it goes so far beyond one person who would have apparently been very flustered if I were speaking because of modesty in this way. But it embodies a principle that when we talk about social justice, when we talk about connections, when we talk about what is meaningful, we move into a realm where we connect, care, make relevant, inspire action. So that's the charge that I leave everybody with today. What are you doing to make a difference? You matter. Your students matter. It's just making sure that you're mindful of the wellspring on a daily basis. Thank you. So if I'm not mistaken, we have a little bit of time for conversation if anybody has thoughts, amplifications, or questions.
I was just thinking, so my field is high school teaching, and I'm just judging by some of the input you receive on Menti from college professors and listening to you, I see commonalities, but I also was thinking, man, if only I could teach college for a day, to just get a taste of what it's like having the students who, many of whom have reached a certain level of maturity, and to better understand, this sort of fluid pathway in becoming, hopefully, a good person. And I just, it would be so cool for me to sort of be in my father's shoes and try to communicate with these students who are in so many different places. That was one thought that occurred to me. It'd probably be good for all college professors to also step into high school and into middle school. And middle school, by many, is considered to be such a terrible place, and it's not. It really isn't. So that was the first thing that I wanted to share, is that it brought to mind that we really need to share in the field of education. And the second was, my father had a little bit of an edge when he taught. He challenged kids, and I don't know if you guys do that, students. So I had a French teacher once who would say, have you read this such and such title by such and such French person? And if no one had, she would say, dommage, too bad. And then she would continue and describe what, he would ask kids, going back to the reading, what do you have to say about this? And that could put people on edge, and about that, because maybe that's Socratic, but is that edge a good thing in education? I know it's the first two letters, but is it good to do that to kids, do you think? Have you found that at the college level?
Yeah, I'll share what I think, and then we can open it up as well. I always knew I wanted to be a teacher. So when I was an undergraduate, I did student teaching in elementary and middle schools, and spent a couple years in classrooms before. So I find that good teachers realize that the methods are very similar, even though the student populations are different. That active learning, engaging students, applied engagement, they're just the hallmarks of effective education top to bottom. So it's the same but different. I've also done play therapy with little kids and realized that you have to be bilingual. You're playing with things and talking about very large and scary concepts at the same time, because everything is representational with the dolls, but you're really talking about things that are happening at home. I find that happens when working with younger people a lot. We can't use our same lexicon, but we're talking about the same thing. The idea of confronting and pushing, that's where that working relationship becomes very important, because if you don't have that strong connection, you're viewed as presumptuous, as arrogant, as contentious. But if the other person knows you care, they can interpret it differently. But the challenge is, it might not be the case for all students are on the same page. I'm curious for my colleagues, what have you found when you push?
You have to be willing to be pushed as well. So, if you're challenging students' ideas or comments, if they can reciprocate you, that draws them in, that engages them. And thinking about what you were just saying, Amy, I think also sharing the why. Why does this matter? And that at any level, that's important, middle school, high school, college. Why does this matter? Rather than I have to be here, I have to do this class for my major, et cetera. But helping students to understand why. And part of that is challenging them, and you being willing to be challenged.
I don't think it was edge, but that was the wrong word. Maybe it was delve. Okay, so we're all supposed to read the same thing. This is a topic. Let's jump in, kind of thing. And I think many students are upset about that. I don't know.
Yeah. Marjorie.
I feel like I'm so glad we're talking about this because it reminds me of something I've been learning about wise feedback. It's an acronym for something where it can be an expression of great care, what Steve's talking about, if the challenge is communicated as, I see how equipped you are, even if you don't yet know it, and the push is coming from a place of knowing that you can go there, and I'm supporting, I'm with you, I'm side by side with you, not antagonistically with you. There's a way to say together we're gonna delve. That I think can be this care. It doesn't have to be separate from the care. It can be an expression of care, combining high standards with high support.
Yeah, and it also depends on your background too. Like I've talked to people who they were raised in an environment where being pushed was integral to this idea of what care should be. That I have to push you to achieve, and that's part of my job as a parent, as opposed to a different philosophy, which could be, my job is to allow you to blossom and me to be of support to you.
Yeah, the more I'm thinking about it, it was almost like, let's go down this road together. That's what it was, rather than an edge. Or delving is part of that, right? We're talking about Montesquieu. Here's the framework, we're supposed to have read. Let's go down that road together and see how it applies to whatever else we're talking about. And I do think that many students don't want to be led down a road that they not of their choosing. So there might be some kind of paradox.
It is. It's really something you have to be able to thread very carefully.
I often think of those moments or phrase things in my classes, the invitation of I can share when I found it valuable to go down that road, what it might look like, that you didn't go down it for today's class. And dial in away if any of this resonates as we talk about it. Maybe it's a real like later. And just kind of folding it all in. As Montesquieu's not going out of print. They will have that moment.
I can't help but think that some of us are afraid of our students. That we're afraid of their reactions if we say, hey, this is what we're talking about, let's talk. And if kids don't talk, it's like, well, maybe I shouldn't have said that, and so we're often trying to readjust and try to find out the way to get the content across in a way that is interesting, but I don't know, it has to do with the changing student too, doesn't it?
It does, it does. As people's sense of security has been undermined by all of the changes in society, the vulnerability is much, much higher. So you could see it in very straightforward numbers. The rise in mental health challenges on college campuses has increased dramatically since the pandemic. The amount of anxiety that's pervasive within our students and within a cohort in general is striking. Something has not changed in the water, something has changed in terms of how we do business with each other and what that feels like. And some people will respond defensively and preemptively by not challenging. Other people will step forward. A lot of it depends on you. Some people feel more comfortable in engaging in the dialogue. Others don't view that as being consistent with what they define caring to be. I think at the end of the day, it's always nice that I have colleagues who are different than me, because to the extent that I don't do research papers in my class, I know one of my colleagues in my department will. To the extent that I wouldn't do an oral presentation in class, I know other colleagues will. So it's the idea of forming community. And maybe that really encapsulates how I just view the world. Like, if you take a step back for a second, everything is intentional. Where I stand, what my arms are doing, the choice of pedagogy, the facilitation of technology, the idea that I could bridge with other people who are not here, the very strong intention to have the chance to talk with you in particular and your family, to really be able to fully appreciate what your dad contributed to the university, because my timing only overlaps by a couple years at the very, very back end. It's this idea of saying community matters, representation matters, voices matter. We come together and we synthesize in ways that we can produce beautiful things together, that everybody has to be acknowledged in some fashion, because that's the central value proposition of caring. That's the central value proposition of constructivism, that we can only create knowledge together and we become more expansive and whole together. And frankly, that's what's kept me at Roosevelt for now 28 years. It's a community that can embrace my own values, that allows me to contribute, but also, most importantly, benefit and grow as a human, which is really fundamental to education and belonging.
I'm sorry if I'm monopolizing, but honestly, do you have the sense in your classes, especially those of you who teach freshmen, that students come in from so many different places, and yet they're within these walls, right? That in effect, do they have a feeling by the end of the first year, and hopefully by the end of the fourth year, that they're really all in the same boat in this larger society, and hopefully kind of, in effect, develop a sense of working together instead of being, you mentioned the pandemic, each in our own little bastion. Does it feel like Roosevelt is the place that you're describing to all of you? You have the sense that they are working together, that you really have to break through walls?
I'm an instructor, so I'm registered in psychology, and I did that through Texas. I think what I can add to what you're saying is, but at Roosevelt, from my experience, every orientation I tell the students, I'm on the journey, whatever that looks like. And then I'll occasionally have a student who needs a little bit extra, and that extra turns into, okay, Steve, I need help because the student's calling me at the night. And so, but to answer to your point, I think people, when you come in as a freshman or you come in as, your first semester in grad school, you find your group, you find your people, and you support each other. But you always have that one person who needs that extra support, who cannot or has not connected with the group. And you have to encourage them to, connect with their core, and try to bring them and make them feel part of the Roosevelt community. And for the most part, it's successful. And I think that's the core of who we are at Roosevelt.
It's a process. So we can pivot at this point to the wonderful little food spread. And of course, I'm hanging around to chat with anybody. And again, I'm very grateful that you devoted the time to spend today.
Thank you.